Hey, B-siders. Welcome to a fresh episode of my Living on a B-side podcast. I'm thrilled you're here. And as you can guess, yes, we have another guest on today. And yeah, I can't wait. I know I mention golden nuggets constantly, and that might be one of my sort of words I throw out there all the time, but it's just true, right? Every single person I have on has amazing things to share, and today will be no different. So without further ado, I welcome Zia to the podcast. Hello, did I pronounce your name correctly?
You did. Thanks for having me, Birgit.
Absolutely,
I
my
saw I saw
pleasure.
you flinch there, like, oh, I hope I got it right. Yes, you did.
Yeah, I'm very aware because my name gets pronounced incorrectly too sometimes, so I know how it
But you
feels.
have a really great way of explaining how to pronounce your name that you told me the last time. And honestly, I don't know if I would have remembered it otherwise, but you said like the drink beer and like get it, beer, get. Okay, I could say that. I could do that.
See, it's not that hard.
Yep.
Excellent. I'm glad it helped. Now, before we dive into all things music, I'd love to share a little bit about who you are to my audience and maybe what you do so they can get a bit of a feel for it. Even though you said on your questionnaire it might not be so relevant at the moment, but who knows? It might be. You never know. So I know you said that you are a life coach for people who are in career transitions. I think it is almost self-explanatory, but yeah, is that's what you do right now? And maybe just give a little bit of a background how you got to this point. Why are you want to help people that want to change careers?
Sure. Yeah. It's a long story, but I'll shorten it for you because I've
Cool.
gotten good at shortening it, which is that I started my career many years ago as an IT consultant, actually, and I
Mm-hmm.
found no joy in that. I felt like it was just a job. I worked for
Mm.
IBM at the time, and I decided, let me do something super passionate. So I became a teacher and I taught children for a number of
Mm-hmm.
years. And that was an amazing job. I was very passionate about it. So goal met. But the problem with a passionate job is that it has so many highs, but so many lows. And that dynamic was kind of like messing with my lifestyle. I was missing
Mm.
weddings, missing funerals, even because being a teacher, you can't take much time off. And so I said, I need
Mm.
to leave this because I was having my own kid. I then became a sort of an ed tech consultant. So education and technology kind of blended those together. Through that, I got a job as an adjunct professor. I trained at an institution and they offered me a job as an adjunct where I now teach teachers. I teach future teachers. And through that, I was able to do a training program to become a coach. And so now I'm launching my own coaching business. But through all of that, you can see in my room here that I have guitars and I'm in a recording studio. I've been recording and writing my own music for the last 30 years. And so the music, it actually, it's kind of relevant because throughout that entire time, I've been
Mm-hmm.
listening to music, I've been recording music, and I've been making sense of the world through the different genres and artists and various things that I've been into and also out of because we go through phases, right? So all of that I think connects.
Oh, wonderful. I love how you sort of led into the music bit. I love that. And I think a lot of people can relate to that as well. Because everyone does it, I reckon, subconsciously, but we use music to kind of make sense of the world. I do think so, even if people don't recognize they do.
Yeah, I
Now,
have
yeah.
I have a whole bunch of Spotify playlists that I've been keeping since it came out in the US, which was 2012,
Mm.
and they're labeled by month. And every month I archive my last month's playlist. So I have about what's the year 2022. So I have about 10 years of Spotify playlists of what I was listening to in each month. And I can go back, Birgit, and listen to any of those playlists, and my mind will go back to exactly where I was at that point in time. So like a map.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's very meticulous. Gee whiz.
Yeah, I am that person.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, yeah, I don't know what to say about that, but
Oh,
that's pretty
you
cool.
haven't even scratched the surface. There's so much more stuff like that in my life. That's like a tiny piece of it.
Okay, I guess IT, teacher, organized. Yeah, I think I can sort of kind of a little bit see where that's
Piece it
coming
together.
from.
Yeah.
Just a tiny little
Yep.
bit.
Hmm.
Now, you mentioned music and obviously different types of music throughout your life, but what's the biggest kind of genre that you feel like had an impact in your life?
All of them have had an impact on my life for
Mm,
sure. But I will say this, and it was the
mhm,
reason why I messaged you and thought this podcast was such a great opportunity to come and talk on, is that since I was a child, there were many genres. I grew up in this house with a huge bookshelf, my dad's bookshelf, and it had
mhm,
all of his philosophy books and engineering books and all these fancy things that I couldn't read, but I would pull them off the shelf in curiosity. There was a huge record collection as well. And this record
mhm,
collection had artists like Joni Mitchell and Paul Simon and other folk artists that, I could immediately relate to and understand. But it also had classical artists and classical musicians, classical, composers. It also had jazz musicians like Miles Davis and John Coltrane. And so I just and this is when I'm like 2 and 3, I have this little Fisher Price record player that actually plays records, and I'm taking these records on and listening to them. And so the thing that kind of ties all of these genres together for me is the sound. For whatever reason, I was super entranced by the different sounds that I would hear. In fact, to the point at which if I put on a record, there's a bunch of Miles Davis records that are like this, where at the end or the beginning, you can hear a little bit of like the studio kerfluffle, like just the artist getting ready to play, or someone's, putting their lips on an instrument or their foot on the pedal of piano. And that like really pulled me in. And I think that's what eventually led me to really get interested in sound as kind of almost as a separate thing from music. And so when I listen to things, I'm listening a lot to the sounds, and I love listening on earphones or headphones for that reason, because you get to hear how the producer and the mixer kind of placed things. So there's not one genre in particular, though the thing that I thought was fascinating is the idea of sound, and particularly ambient music, which is
mhm.
a topic that I know we'll get into.
Yes, that's what I was kind of trying to lead into, and
Ah, yeah,
yeah,
I picked up
we
on
got
that.
there. We got there.
Yeah.
So what is it about ambient music that particularly piques your interest?
Well, okay, so I mentioned how I like these sort of like psychoacoustic moments, I guess you could call them, in,
Mhm,
whatever pop recordings, folk recordings, whatever. The thing about ambient music, when I first discovered it, it was through an album called Music for Airports by Brian Eno. And Brian Eno is kind of a very famous figure in the world of ambient music. He's known as like the father of ambient music. And there are probably other people that you could attribute that start to. Steve Reich being another one, although his style is a little bit different. But when I first heard Music for Airports, I didn't quite get it. Have you heard that record before?
not to the full extent. I have sort of gone into little bits and
Pieces of
pieces.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So you get the concept, which is just that it's sort of like they designed this music to be played in an airport. He designed this music to be played in an airport.
Mhm,
And so it's meant to be the type of album you can totally ignore, and it's just going to fill the air with sound. And at the
mhm,
same time, if you want to, you can tune in to whatever's happening. Now, that's like not even the most fascinating part. The most fascinating part is the way he composed this music is by basically creating these little piano lines, short ones, like, 5 to 10 seconds, on tape, because this is the 70s, I believe, that he made this. And then he let these pieces of tape run across each other randomly at different speeds. So what you're hearing on the recording is not a performance. You're hearing 20 minutes of these loops kind of mutating and morphing and evolving into these various musical pieces. I mean, isn't that so crazy? It's all a process of like random attribution and random sound. And so when I heard that for the first time, I didn't quite get it. And there was something about me as a teenager where I thought, okay, if there's an album that has been recommended on Amazon or whatever it was, this is like the early 2000s when Amazon was like, you go there for your record reviews and stuff. Um, I would be like, if this is like acclaimed, there's something that I'm missing. Like, I clearly don't get it. I need to listen to it over and over again. My Bloody Valentine, Loveless is another example of that. Jeff Buckley's Grace is another example of something I didn't quite get at first, but later it hit me. So Eno's Music for Airports is the same way, because I really spent a lot of time inside of that record, letting it play in the background, listening to it intently. And finally it hit me. The reason why I love this is because those psychoacoustic moments that captured me so much, that are just kind of fleeting in there for a second, this is a whole album of that. This is a whole album of just sort of like just ephemeral stuff kind of floating out there in the atmosphere. So that brought me into this whole world of like, oh, who else does this stuff? Who came after Eno, and what else is out there?
Wow, that's like opening the lid to a whole other space of music that the majority of people probably don't recognize or think about, isn't it?
I think so.
Because
Yeah. I
yeah, because I've
yeah, for sure.
never thought about it like that, and just when you just explained how he recorded that album, my first thought was, God, he must have been on like magic mushrooms or something when he did it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's just obviously the way him as an artist, I suppose, tried something new.
That's Eno's way of
Right?
working. I mean, I became a huge what they call an Eno file, someone who's really into Eno. There's
Right.
people who worship the guy as an
Uh-huh.
artist. I listened to every interview I could possibly get my hands on. This is in my late teen years to early 20s. I'm 37 now, so that you can kind of do the math as to where I was in that point. And it's kind of like basically his whole thing was he went to art school. That was his thing.
Right.
And they kept in the art school that he went to, they kept giving him problems like, hey, this is a white piece of paper. This is a black piece of paper. Now make this black and make this white without even touching them. It's like, okay, what kind of question is that? How do you do that? That's crazy. And so his mind is going crazy with these ideas like, okay, how can I do my painting but make it with sound instead? I'm not a musician. He considers himself not a musician, but he likes to paint with sound. That just blows my mind because I don't know of any other musician that at least that until Eno really thought that way. Very fascinating.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, my mind goes like, oh, paint with music. And yeah, I mean, I always sort of try to tell people sound is everywhere and sound is music. So, what some people might perceive as noise is actually a nice sound to someone else, possibly. So, yeah, that kind of fascinates me to look at it
I
from that angle. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I experienced that too. I actually made this. No one knows about this except for you now and your listeners. But I
Ooh.
actually have a Bandcamp account where I try to make similar stuff to Eno, and I'm not as good at it as the people that actually put effort into it. But I live in Washington D.C. and we have a metro, a subway, train, like it takes you underground to different parts of the city. And
Mhm.
I, I was on it with a friend, and we were talking and talking, and all of a sudden we got silent for a second. When you're hanging out with a friend, and all of a sudden you stop
Yeah.
talking for a second, and we started listening to the sounds of the train, and we were like, these sounds are beautiful. Everything. I don't know why it just hit us. Like the sound of the ding when the door opens, the sound of the doors themselves opening, the sound of the train moving, the sound of like even those stupid, the next station is Fort Todd, like that sort of thing coming on. We just kind of were like, this is cool. So we came back later. It's so weird. This is like 10 years ago. We came back later with a little recorder, the Zoom recorder, and we went on the train and recorded all these sounds. And there is an album called Lines that is all about that is just those sounds with some other sort of guitar underlying, but mostly it's about the sounds themselves. And at the very beginning, when I hit record, you can hear my friend saying, okay, so I guess we just stop talking now. And that's the last thing you hear of us. The rest is all sounds of the metro. We tried to keep quiet the entire time, inspired by Eno.
Wow. That is pretty cool. And I guess for me, as I call myself a music lover, but it's still kind of something where I go, huh, okay. Yeah, my brain tries to kind of understand it, but then, yeah, I might have to dig into that a little bit more and just, let it happen
You're gonna
and
go in an ambient like bender now, aren't you? Just listening to ambient records. Like what is this magic that he's trying to uncover here?
yeah, because just sort of listening to Eno's album that you've just mentioned before, I'm like, I don't know if I could listen to that all the time because I don't know about you, but for me, it felt a little bit. I don't know if the word irritating at first was, but that was my initial reaction.
Yep.
At an airport, I can understand it, like you said, it's in the background, but consciously listening to it, my brain was going, oh, because maybe I've never listened to it like that before. So that might be a nice challenge.
If you listen to things analytically a lot, which I do too, I certainly do.
Mm-hmm.
This is a really good opportunity to put something on and let your brain go where it wants to go and kind of leave the
Yeah.
music. Like, when you're reading a book, I don't know if you've ever experienced this. You're reading a book and you're like 3 pages in and you're like, you don't remember anything you read because you're not really reading, your brain is somewhere else. That's what happens when you listen to ambient music, and that's what's supposed to happen when you listen to ambient music. And the types of places that you go are really fascinating. But it's funny you said the thing about being irritated, because one of the stories that I remember, there's a guitarist, and I want to say he's Austrian. I'm pretty sure he's Austrian. His name is, and I hope I get this name right, Fennesz. Do you know this guitarist? Fennesz.
No, I don't think I do.
So he makes music, ambient music as well. It's kind of, but it's all guitar based, and he runs his guitars through crazy synthesizers and amplifiers and all these crazy effects, and it creates this sort of sonic landscape. Not exactly like Eno. It's a little bit more like he's performing a piece. But I went to go see him live. He came to a place, and at the time I was living in this like wooded area with like all these deer, and he was playing in a place that was like a 10-minute walk from where I was living. So I was like, oh, it's great. So, you know, I didn't have kids at the time. I was living by myself.
Yeah.
I just paid for this ticket and I walked to, it's a mansion where this was being held. And I walked in, and there were people. Well, first of all, something fascinating. They were selling records in the lobby, where, you know how the record, when you play a record, it kind of spins and the groove kind of goes inward, inward, inward until it gets to the end of the record and you flip it over.
Yeah.
So they were selling records that had a groove in it that was continuous. It never actually left the track. So there were 100 tracks on this record. I still have this, and you could put your needle on any one, and maybe you'd hear like frogs chirping, and it would just be an endless loop of frogs chirping. The needle would never move from that groove.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that crazy? So then I go into the concert space to watch this concert. And I noticed, just by the way of people like signing with each other and just kind of looking around, there were a lot of deaf people in the audience. And the people who weren't deaf were wearing earplugs. And I was like, why is everyone wearing earplugs? Then because this is like ambient music, right? You don't expect it to be like, you know, loud. Anyway, he gets on stage. This is one of the loudest concerts I've ever been to in my life. It was a headline set, 40 minutes of music. So it's not a long headline set, because you really can't take much more of 40 minutes of this noise guitar. And I walked out of there, and I went to this concert alone. I rarely go to concerts alone. I usually have a concert buddy. But I left this concert and I'm like, I am so glad I didn't have anyone to go with, because when I walked out, I didn't have anyone to turn and say, was that as weird as I thought it was? Or was that as beautiful as I thought it was? Was it cool? Was it good? Was it bad? It was like this experience that I wasn't judging, and I didn't have anyone else to reflect on it with for ever. I still was left with that hanging feeling of like, what was that I just experienced? So you saying that it was kind of irritating kind of made me think of that moment of like, it could have been irritating, but I don't remember it. I remember it being just sort of like new and novel.
I think from what you describe about ambient music, and I admit I obviously haven't dabbled at all into it, it's a good opportunity to broaden your mind and become more open. That might help in life in general then too.
Well, it also helps with if you then listen to other types of music that maybe at first doesn't appeal to you, you can use that skill of like, well, where does my mind go? Jazz is one of those genres for me where at first I was kind of like, I'm not really like, I'm a musician, but I'm not a jazz musician. I don't get theory really. You know, do I really understand this? Is it something for me, jazz music? And someone gave me the advice once of like, oh, just follow the notes, just listen to it and follow the notes, and kind of just with your brain, just kind of follow the notes. Change the whole game. Once that happened, I was like, oh, it's fun. It's like a little roller coaster ride. This is really fun. And there might be musicians out there listening to this laughing and saying, oh, you don't get it. But I think music is up to everybody's own unique interpretation. So
yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. And that's the beauty of this podcast too. It sort of opens doors for, you know, indirectly artists that maybe no one, that sounds horrible, not no one, but they're not sort of talked about, or styles of music like ambient. Because if you just hear ambient, you think, oh, it's sort of nice background music that's chilled and mellow. And from what we've just talked about, it doesn't necessarily have to be like that, is it?
No.
So
some of it can be quite crazy, and there is all sorts of, now, you know, if you go on YouTube and you look up lo-fi, I don't know if you've ever seen this YouTube channel. It's like a live channel where there's
Mhm.
just constant lo-fi music playing, and there's this little girl doing homework. It's just an endless loop of her doing homework
Of
and
course.
just lo-fi music playing. I put it on when I'm working sometimes just because, and even then I get distracted because I think maybe because I've listened to so much ambient music that my brain is like, ooh, I want to tune into that melody or that chord, that texture. So now I've gotten to the point where when I work, I can't even listen to that. I listen to literally there's a podcast called Ambient Nature Sounds. So I'll listen to a recording of like someone who sat by a lake and recorded the frogs croaking for like 2 hours, and that'll be my work session because anything else will distract me, believe it or not.
Wow. So you fine-tuned your ears so much to listen really in depth to the sound that your brain automatically gets focused on that. That's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, it's either that I've trained myself or that was just my natural inclination because like
Could
I
be.
said, even from an early age, that was something that fascinated me. Like
Mm.
Michael Jackson's album Thriller,
Mhm.
or the song Thriller. You know how
Yeah.
in the very beginning there's like a door creaking
Mhm.
and there's like right before the music comes in. I used to like rewind the tape and listen to that piece over and over and over again. I was fascinated by it. I don't really get why or know why, but I thought it was so cool.
Oh, well, at least you did something on that song that, you know, piqued your interest.
True.
I
Yeah.
don't think
Yeah.
you would have predicted it would have been the door creaking, but
Yep.
yeah,
Yep. Exactly.
it's all good.
Exactly. Hmm.
Now, if you would have to, and I know you've already touched on that a little bit through our chat here, but for someone like me who's a complete newbie to ambient, what would you describe is, I don't know if the word purpose is the right word, but what's sort of what's the purpose of ambient, do you think? And for some beginners, where should they start with ambient music? Just to get a feel for it and
Yeah.
get
It's a great
introduced
question.
to it.
It's a great question. I think the purpose of it is, again, up for interpretation. There are some people who really love the idea of using it for, like I was just mentioning, for work. Like they want to put it on to kind of ease their mind a little bit. Or for some people, maybe it's something that they put on if they're trying to unwind or meditate, right? Meditation is another big one. Yoga is another big one.
Mm.
Um, Another thing you can try if you're looking for a purpose is try putting it on at a dinner party. Now, not like a party that's meant to be like a rager or a loud, sort of, active party, but kind of a calm dinner party.
Mhm.
Just put it on softly in the background, so softly, in fact, that it's almost like you have to strain to hear it. And your guests probably won't be conscious of what's happening. But if you pay attention as the host, knowing that you've done this little trick, you can kind of see the way the room changes and the way that the conversation might shift due to this now new color that has been introduced. Like if you and I were standing in a living room that was just bare walls versus standing in a living room that had like, cool blue lighting, or, the mood would be different. If we were trying to be
Mm.
creative, if I'm trying to be creative in this space here, which you can see is like, very kind of cool and there's these cool lights on the wall and stuff, versus like if I'm trying to be creative in like a basketball court during a game,
Mm.
the whole thing changes. So like you can use ambient music to change the mood in the room, change your own internal weather if you like. And then a good place to start, it depends on what you are into. I don't think there's any better place to start than Eno, because the reason why I think that's true is because he's really got something for everybody. Every single one of his ambient albums, and he's got more than just ambient music. I mean, he was part of Roxy Music, the first few albums. So that's, straight up rock music. Well, it's pretty varied and eclectic, but it's rock music. And that actually is kind of why Brian Ferry and Brian Eno split, because of this disagreement over where it should go.
Right.
But anyway, he's got a very deep catalog of ambient music. And so if you and actually Music for Airports was part of a quartet, 4 records, each with their own thing. So Music for Airports was one. There was a second one called Plateau of Mirror, a third one called Day of Radiance, and a fourth one called On Land. And each one is completely different. If you're somebody that kind of is into classical music,
Mhm.
I recommend the second one, Plateau of Mirror. That one is a collaboration with a piano.
Oh, you dropped out. Yo,
Am I
hang
back
on.
now?
Yes, you're
Yeah.
back.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah. My thing flashed and it said something weird. So
that's
sorry about
okay.
that. My apps are all like weirdly opening and closing. Okay, so what I was saying was, if you're somebody who's into like classical music and that's
Mhm,
something that calms you, makes you feel good, I recommend checking out Plateau of Mirror. It's a
mhm,
collaboration with a pianist named Harold Budd. You could also check out, and Harold Budd is just beautiful piano playing compositions that Eno then took and sort of made them colorful, if that makes sense. Like he kind of changed the way it
mm,
sounded. It's still recognizable, still a piano, but it's this beautiful sound that sort of like takes you and makes you relaxed. Whereas music for airports is really more of that background, like just let it kind of sit in the thing. Then Day of Radiance is a collaboration with a guy named Laraji. It's very intense, and I wouldn't recommend it unless you're looking for something a little more active. He plays
mhm.
like the hammered dulcimer, and it's very intense. And the fourth one on land is with a trumpet player called John. Oh, I have to look it up, but it's with a trumpet player, and in that one, John Hassel, that's his name, and he's taken his trumpet recording and sort of muted it and twisted it in a way where it now sounds not like a trumpet anymore, but it sounds very relaxing. That one's cool too if you're just kind of in an exploratory mood, maybe if you're doing some
Mhm.
work. Those are all really good places to start. If you gosh, there's so many good. If you're into some want to get into some of the newer stuff,
Mhm.
Tim Hecker is a really good artist.
Wow.
Sakamoto, Ryuichi Sakamoto is another really great artist. Calming stuff. He makes a lot of movie music. You probably heard his song "Merry
Mm.
Christmas, Mr. Lawrence." It's been in a ton of movies. It gets a lot of placement.
Wow.
So those are all really good places to start. And then from there, I think find the stuff that you like, and you can
Mhm,
sort of, go on YouTube, on Reddit, and just find stuff that's like it, and sort of
mhm.
expand what you're listening to. I will say this, Birgit, I
Yep.
I I was like I mentioned, I was really into it in my 20s, and at some point I stopped listening to it. That's the kind of the fascinating part of the story, is that after all this,
Mm.
now I'm sort of like I don't have the attention span for it anymore. I still play it, like for instance, I taught third grade, which is 9-year-olds, and when they would come back in from recess, playing outside on the playground, they would be all tired and worked up, and I
Mhm,
would have this 15 minutes of quiet time, and every day I played music for airports, and my students at some point were like, "What is this music that we keep listening to every day, and why is it the same every day?" And it's the
mhm,
same every day because it elicits that same mood every single day. I could switch it up occasionally, but I kept
mhm,
it the same thing because it's like just that comfort, especially for children, knowing exactly what to expect when they walk into a space,
mm.
and the
Yep.
way it transformed the space, it gave them this opportunity to just kind of take that mental volume down a little bit after being so active.
Mhm.
But yeah, I kind of lost my I still like it, I'm not quite as enamored with it as I used to be, and I think I have to believe part of that is because of our culture now with like short form videos and sort of these like very quick things that are fleeting and just come on the screen and go off the screen. I
Mhm.
wonder in a way if that has trained me out of listening to long form pieces like ambient.
Yeah, well, they do say that generally the population has an attention span of less than a goldfish, so it's like less than
Yeah,
2 or 3 seconds, so
yeah.
it's
I used to hear 7 seconds, but I think it's gotten less.
we'll end up at 0 at some point.
Yeah, right.
I hope not. I hope not.
Just flipping through songs endlessly.
Yeah, yeah, don't even play, just scroll up and down a playlist.
Yeah.
Yeah, not good. That'd be tragic. God, no. So
You know,
yeah, that's interesting that you kind of stop. But then, like you said, we all go through phases in our lives where, we change, our music taste changes. Sometimes you might go through a phase where you don't listen to music whatsoever. It can happen. Happened
right?
to me before where I'm like, when was the last time I literally put a song on?
Wow. Yeah.
So you got to go, why is that? That's always a bit of a trigger for me to ask why. Why am I
Yeah.
not listening to music? What is going on here? So, yeah, so that'd be interesting. Maybe just your life
It
changed and you got the little ones now, so your attention is
well,
somewhere
yeah.
else. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And also another thing that I've thought about is that I don't know if you're a Spotify user, but I'm a very heavy Spotify user,
Mm.
and have been for the last decade. And one thing that it's done is it's created an algorithm for me around music that I didn't used to have. I used to be very exploratory, and I'd go and
Mm.
find music that like the cover intrigued me, or you know someone recommended it, like a friend,
Mhm.
but now I feel like because Spotify plays for me and gives me recommendations, based on what I listen to, which comes from Spotify, it's
Yeah.
kind of cornered me into a particular genre, and it's very it's fine. It's obviously I like it, right? Because I keep listening to it.
Yeah.
But like, does it actually expand my brain? Does it allow me to actually go and find those new pieces? No. So what I do is I have a secret weapon called it's a blog called New Album Releases, and I don't know what it is or who created it or anything, but it still exists. And they just post every single day if there's a new release, big or small. I've seen like my friends' albums on there who are not, famous by any means, big or small, up to like, like any big artist would be on there. If I see something and I'm intrigued by the track titles or the cover, I'll go listen to it. And I found some amazing artists that way that like still are not famous, that nobody would know. I would never find them otherwise. So you kind of have to keep yourself in that. I mean, I used to go to the library to do this. And they used to have CDs at the library, and I would find a whole bunch of artists that way. I discovered like Lyle Lovett that way. And there's a whole bunch of artists that I discovered through the library, but that was through just flipping through and being like, oh, well, it's free. So it looks interesting. Might as well try it. And sometimes it was a flop and other times it was awesome.
Yeah, that reminds me of the good old days when I used to go. We had like late night shopping on a Thursday night. I used to go with my friends to like the big like we didn't have record stores on their own back in Switzerland. They were like integrated in big sort of shopping center type of things. And they used to have like stations where you can listen to an album. So
I remember those.
And I remember doing that. So it was like this social interaction. You're like, oh, what do you think of this? And so it was really cool. That way you kind of discovered new artists, and then like you said, just going through like the albums and having a look at the cover. And I find that Spotify doesn't allow you to do that anymore much. They just suggest stuff to you, and
I miss those listening stations. I used to go to, there was a chain here in the US called Tower, and I think Tower was international. I think it was other places maybe, but they had these listening stations, and the staff would actually be the ones to pick out the music. And God, so many albums in my youth that I discovered through that. And they had these really nice, huge headphones that you could listen to it through, and it would make it sound really good. And then, sometimes I would go home and I'd listen to it and then be like, yeah, it would last for like maybe a few days and I would toss it or not listen to it again. But because I was just enamored in the moment. But I miss those recommendations, the human ones. But I guess your podcast is sort of a form of bringing it back.
I was just about to say that the amount of artists I've discovered and songs I've listened to that I've never ever heard before is just amazing. Just through talking to people, and they're sharing their favorite songs, and it's been amazing. I just love it. And also like genres of music that I would have. Yeah, I realized for me it's also a little bit of a self-discovery journey almost. I'm like, why am I going like, I don't like that genre of music, when literally it is actually really good.
Right.
So it's
or at least there's something to be gained from it. Like even things like heavy metal, right, is something that I have never really been into as kind of a quiet listening to my ambient, piano plunking music. I never really got into screaming death metal, but I have a friend who is like a metal aficionado. He knows every single genre. There's even Viking metal. I don't exactly know what that is, but
I think I've heard of it before, but I've never listened to it myself. So.
Me either. I've been too frightened, but it exists. And so my point is just, like I like going back to like things like Jeff Buckley's Grace, right? Classic. Do you know that one? Yeah. So classic album, of course it has Hallelujah, but it's got just every song on it is just phenomenal. And the first time I listened to it, I didn't get it. I hadn't heard anything like it. I didn't really know Led Zeppelin, and I feel like it's very Zeppelin. If you kind of know Zeppelin, I feel like Grace makes a little bit more sense at least. And I didn't really know Zeppelin. So like now, but like listening to it over, My Bloody Valentine, Loveless, do you know that one?
Not up until today. I did check it out, so there you go.
Okay. You checked it out today?
Yes, I did.
Oh, no way. Wow, that's crazy coincidence. For me, that was an album that when I first listened to it, I listened to it with a bunch of my high school friends, and they said, this sounds like a lawnmower. Like it sounds like you're just playing a recording of a lawnmower. And I was like, oh, and then but there's so much beauty underneath all the layers of sound in that album. And I think that's why it's so, acclaimed and such a landmark album. And in some ways it relates back to ambient music, because while that is a heavy, loud album, and My Bloody Valentine, those concerts are all people wearing earplugs or plugging their ears. It's like the loudest possible thing you can listen to. But there's like this sort of sense of zen awareness that comes over you when you're listening to it. And at some point for me, that album, like, 10 to 20 listens in, suddenly clicked, and now it's a classic for me. I know every well, I don't know the words because they're like hidden underneath all the guitar sounds, but I know every shape on that album. Let's put it that way. Every color.
Yeah, amazing. Now, I think we've covered. Oh God, I mean, this is so in depth, and I think it's a really good reminder for everybody who's listening that there's more to music than meets the ear at first hearing.
Ooh, I love that. I love that saying.
So maybe go back and listen to albums we love with not new ears, but maybe try to see something that we've missed. So
Oh yeah.
that's kind of the message I'm getting from our chat
Oh
overall.
man, that's a great. I mean, that I didn't think about it quite like that, but it's really, even albums you love, if you
Mm.
go back and listen to it as if you've never heard it before,
Mm.
like, and you can do that, right? Like, obviously you have heard it before, you can't wipe it out of your memory, but you go back and you say, I'm not going to listen to it like, oh, it's my favorite song, I'm just going to put it on. I'm going to
Mm.
listen to it like I've never heard it before. It
Mm.
changes how you listen to it. You suddenly appreciate, like, I was listening to there's a Bruce Hornsby album that I've been so into lately called Spirit Trail. Do you know this one?
I don't think I do. I don't think
Yeah,
I
he's got
do.
such a big discography, but this is from '98. The cover's got his uncle Walter, and he's got a cigarette in his ear, and he's lighting the cigarette that's in his ear. It's a
Oh
very weird
gosh.
cover based on the music itself. Phenomenal album, double album of just song after song of gorgeous music. If you like Hornsby, at least, I mean, it's so good. And my son's really into it now. My older
Mhm.
son is we listen to this album like daily, and he loves. And we're actually going to see Bruce Hornsby together
Oh,
in the end of
nice.
this month. Yeah, very exciting. But anyway, I listened to that as a kid, like, 15, 16 years old.
Mhm.
And lately I was like, oh, I've loved that album. Let me go back and listen to it. And I go back and listen to it, and I'm like, oh, this is so good. It wasn't just that I liked it as a kid. It's like, this might be one of my favorite albums of all time, if not my top album. Just song
Wow.
after song of just like hits me like exactly where, whatever lock and key needs to happen, it happens for me.
Mhm.
So yeah, go back and listen to albums that you've forgotten about or haven't listened to in a while,
Yeah.
like they're new things.
Yeah. I think I just thought of an album I might go and listen back to. So there you
Oh,
go.
do share.
And do you know the band Extreme? They're like a rock
Yeah,
band.
I performed
And
an Extreme song at a wedding last summer. I'm sure you can guess which one.
More Than Words.
Oh, that's the one.
No, I mean, that album's amazing, but it's the one after, and I can't remember the name of it now. I can see the album cover visually, but
I don't know any other songs by them, so this is gonna be my
they
homework too.
yeah, they had made an album which was they divided it in three sections. And when I first listened to it, it was them, but it was kind of new, and it really threw me because they had like lots of orchestra pieces in there,
Mm,
and one song was like nearly 10 minutes, and
wow.
it was really challenging for me coming because I love rock and heavy metal amongst other
Yeah.
things. But for me, it was like, what are these guys doing? But in the end, I really loved it because you can just see they were so thoughtful in how they've arranged it and how they set it up. But even for me as a non musician, I could kind of almost see what they were doing, and it was just beautiful. So I might have to listen back to that.
It's kind of interesting, like, to think about albums as they were back in the day. Like,
Mhm.
even I just mentioned double album, and you said there's a 3-part thing. Like, I feel
Mhm.
like that there maybe some artists do that, but it's like I rarely hear an album these days and think this is an album. Like, the last one I heard that really made me stop and be like, oh yeah, this is an album, is
Mhm.
Kendrick Lamar's new album. Is a very emotional experience. If you're going to listen to that one, be in an emotionally stable place, I think.
Right.
But it from start
Noted.
to finish, the whole thing is like, whoa, it's just like so well constructed and very
Yeah.
very artistic. So
Yeah. Cool. I'll make a mental note of
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Now, before we kind of start to wrap up our chat, which we probably could have gone on for another hour or
I know.
so,
Exactly.
which will be very interesting, but I always try to ask people if they have a current song that kind of describes where they are in life and or business, and also share the reason why they picked that song. And I hope that's
Yeah.
not throwing you out a bit here.
No, not at all. I love that question. It's gonna have to be for me, Bruce Hornsby, because um, that album, Spirit Trail. There are actually two songs, if you don't mind,
Yeah,
on that
that's
album
fine.
that currently are just kind of destroying me. No, there's actually more than two. Okay, so I'll give you three, and I'll make it short because I could go on forever. So there's one, the opening track of Spirit Trail by Bruce Hornsby, King of the Hill, is about. Uh, I don't think Bruce Hornsby is a musician, but it's from the perspective of someone who's like an office worker and like kind of looking at this like this plane of people in cubicles and sort of being like, this is such an unnatural way to live part of our lives. And it's
Yep.
really good. Then and that's currently how I feel about certain parts of my life. Then there's another song on that record called Shadow Hand. It's on the second disc, and that's the one my son and I listen to all the time. Shadow Hand, the lyrics are, I'm shaking my shadow hand. I just think it's beautiful. I don't really know what it's about, but I interpret it to mean that if you know, like Carl Jung, like there's this shadow self or this part of
Mm-hmm.
ourselves that's kind of like a darker side of ourselves that we kind of have to befriend in order to really come to peace with ourselves. And so I think of
Mm-hmm.
that idea of like, I'm shaking my shadow hand. I'm not pushing away the parts of me that I don't like or that I find unpleasant. I'm actually, befriending it.
Yeah.
Feels very Jungian to me, that song. And then the last one is the song I just started listening to. My friend Chris recommended it. Same Bruce Hornsby, different record. Halcyon Days is the name of the record. I think that's how you pronounce it. And the song is called Hooray for Tom. And it's about how, from Bruce Hornsby's perspective, um, this spelling bee, and he was in a spelling bee and he spelled the words wrong, but this guy Tom won, and Tom got to be on TV. And so the lyrics are, everyone said hooray for Tom, and I hope one day they'll say hooray for me. And it's just like this kind of like pokes you in, and the way the music fits with the lyrics. Oh, it's so good. As you can tell, I'm a huge Hornsby fan, and I still don't know all of his songs, so I'm going through all of them now to get acquainted. But oh, so good.
Yeah, I love what your takeaways from all three of them, and that's the beauty of obviously having an artist that can make music and then put it out in the world and allow everyone to make their own. I don't know. I don't like the word assumption, but make their own meanings
Yeah,
for themselves. And I think if an
their own
artist can
use.
achieve that, that's
Yeah,
that for me is beautiful. And yeah, sometimes I feel like I want to share that with particular artists, but then you think, well, my email probably just gets in the spam folder and this and that. But it
right.
would be nice if more people do it. Actually, have been challenged to do that, so I've got to get into
Well,
that and get it done.
I'm thinking if my son last night, I whenever I tuck him in, he asked me to sing a song to him. And so lately it's been Shadow
Mm-hmm.
Hand. And last night before I started singing it, he started singing it. He sang the whole
Oh.
chorus. Now
Mm-hmm.
he's almost 4, right? So he's a young kid. And I almost thought, like, what if I filmed this, put it on like Instagram or something, and like tagged Bruce Hornsby? Do you think he'd watch it and think it was cool? Like maybe, like maybe he'd think it was cool. I don't know.
But then again, it's like you don't know until you try, you
That's
know?
true. Yeah. What's the worst
So,
that can happen? A ton of people are
exactly.
delighted. I'll take it.
Yeah, and you might inspire, you might get some more people on to become appreciation of his music or even fans. You don't know.
Yeah, you're
So
right. That's a good point.
passing the
Yeah.
torch along, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it.
Mm. Cool. Oh, wonderful. That was a really, really amazing chat. And I loved how you sort of took us on a journey into the ambient world. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for letting me go in all sorts of directions.
It's good to do that now and then. It gets your brain
Yeah,
going on different levels, which is what we need
I
at
agree.
times.
Indeed.
So thank you for sharing everything you have with myself and obviously my audience.
My pleasure. Thanks for having
I
me.
yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It's been,
Oh,
yeah,
my
I
pleasure.
loved it. And that's it, guys. Another episode done and dusted with. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, please shoot them in our direction. You never know, there might be fun questions, whatever questions coming out of this. So please let us know. All the details will be in the episode description. And yeah, that's it. I'm signing off for this episode. And as I always say to you guys, keep on dancing and keep on rocking. And I shall speak to you again very soon. Until then, you all take care. Bye.